So today's issue really is about trying to understand how the EU's methane strategy and the forthcoming gas market reform are likely to influence the global natural gas markets. And to understand this fairly complex issue, we have invited with us today Stéphanie Saunier, who is probably the world's expert that has seen most of methane emissions outside the EU's borders. So thank you very much, Stéphanie, for making the time to join us on a Friday afternoon. And we have also invited Manfredi Caltagirone, who is one of the architects of the world's first harmonized monitoring, reporting, and verification system for methane emissions from oil and gas. Manfredi leads the work on behalf of UNEP, and we are very, very lucky to have him today joining us from Madrid. Hi, Manfredi. And we continue, of course, with our two distinguished MEPs, Jutta Paulus, who has probably been the biggest leader on methane issues and the biggest advocate for ambitious action, very closely followed by Nicolas Casares from the Socialist Group in the European Parliament. We are very honored to have you both today, when we all know that this is probably the busiest month for both of you. So thank you very, very much. And next in line, we have probably the man with the hardest work in the whole of Europe, Stefan Rolle, who leads energy policy in the German Energy Ministry. Stefan, thank you very much also for making the time to be with us when you are probably the busiest man with the German presidency's agenda right now. Thank you very much. Followed by our honorable guest, Mr. Sakamoto, a prominent thinker on Japan's hydrogen economy, who is also going to share with us a little bit how Japan is thinking about really building a hydrogen economy in the most sustainable possible way. Welcome, Mr. Sakamoto. We have also with us Jonathan Stern, one of Europe's, possibly Europe's most prominent thinker in terms of energy geopolitics and with very good knowledge of the neighboring countries around Europe. Jonathan has recently published a very thought-provoking paper, which I very warmly recommend that you all read, on methane emissions and how Europe should think about its imports policy. So thank you very much, Jonathan, for making the time. And next on, we have Georges Taibosch from MIQ, a certification scheme. Thank you very much, Georges, for joining us. Last but not least in our list of panelists, I leave my boss's boss, Mark Brownstein, who I really don't understand why he's still working with us instead of pitching for the post of the Department of Energy leader. But very lucky to have him here today to share with us a little bit of his experience and what he knows the Biden administration's intentions are in this new mandate. Thank you very much, Mark, for jumping in at the last minute when I know you have no time to juggle things. And last but absolutely not least, I welcome my co-hosts, Christopher Jones, whom most of you know is the architect of energy markets liberalizations and one of the people who has gone where very few people have dared before in kind of doing things that people thought should belong in a lab. He actually made them happen. Very much welcome, Christopher. And last, I extend my welcome to our second co-host, Andris Piebalgs, who you all know, one of the best energy commissioners the EU ever has had, who has also been an innovator and the first leader who broke the taboos of energy policy and linked it to sustainability. So without further ado, if I may invite Christopher to lead us into the main part of the webinar today. And thank you all very much for joining.
Poppy, thank you so much. And thank you for that very kind introduction. I only wish my mum was listening in so she could hear somebody say such kind words. With the authoritative panelists that we have here today, it requires very little introduction. I'd only say that this issue is really, really important. It's one of the most important things that I think we've got on our agenda at the moment, and I think it's often underestimated. It's important in terms of ensuring that the EU meets its climate change obligations. We can't keep consuming natural gas in the way we do unless we know exactly what the FME, fugitive methane emissions, are and take them into account. It's very important in terms of energy security as well, for in a reason I'll mention in a minute. And it's very important in terms of ensuring we have a continued cost-effective energy policy. Secondly, it's going to be really, really, really complicated to find the right solution here. There is no silver bullet. Because if you unpick it, transparency, yes, absolutely, we need transparency. That's absolutely clear. We need to be sure the level of FME that we are consuming with the different types of gas we have, but it means imposing the EU's requirements, rules, approach on non-EU member states or companies in one way or the other. So yeah, we need this. We need the carrot of this transparency. That's obvious, but we also need the stick. We also need the stick of internalizing greenhouse gas levels in terms of the cost of gas prices, as you would with any ETS activity, if you like. But in order to probably have the worst example of a mixed metaphor you'll hear this year, we have to be very careful that when we're using this stick, we don't shoot ourselves in the foot with it. Because when you're talking about internalizing the levels of fugitive methane emissions, you're obviously talking about some form of tax charge, quota, or import restriction, as you have in the biofuels area. And that is going to have effects, for example, in terms of your energy security policy, because it may limit or affect the sources of gas that you can rely on during the decarbonisation period or the post-decarbonisation period for natural gas in the hydrogen. But that's another debate, of course. So the third point is this needs to be solved. This can't go on forever. Because at some point in time, you absolutely do need to internalize the GHG from fugitive methane emissions, and at the same time have the approach of incentivizing suppliers to reduce them to absolute minimum. It's going to be essential in terms of our guarantees of origin debate, in terms of hydrogen, just by way of example. And if we don't solve this, I see a systemic risk that you end up then having non-fact-based policy solutions to this this problem. So there'll be a push clearly to have some form of arbitrary phase-out date for natural gas, or some sort of similar measures to try and take account of FME that are not actually related to the FMEs themselves. And that makes no sense at all, but you can see the dynamic starting. So I'm really excited to hear what the panelists are going to say. So thank you, Poppy.
Thank you very much, Christopher. I was told that Andres also had a few words to share with us today. Andres,
no, only at the end, yes, Poppy. So it's Christopher will give me the floor. So welcome everybody, and I'm really pleased that all of you made it. And particularly, I would like to thank Toshi, because it's for him it's already Friday night, so we all are still in the afternoon. But for Toshi, it's really a great effort to make. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very much, Andres. Then, without further ado, Stephanie, may I invite you to share with us the scale of the problem?
Yes, thanks, Poppy. Let me share my screen. Can you confirm you can see the presentation, Poppy? Yeah. Okay, so today I've been asked to discuss in 10 minutes a large problem, which is the methane emission from the natural value chain import to Europe. And just a brief introduction on myself. So Poppy did a fantastic job. I've been working all my career on greenhouse gas emission from the oil and gas sector, and the last 10 years on methane emissions. And our team Carbon Limits, we work on most of the countries which are on this value chain, and I listed a few here below. So I guess everybody here knows the challenge. The challenge is at least, and there's obviously uncertainty, 3/4 of the emissions of methane emission from natural gas consumed in the EU occurs outside this border. So basically, the blue box here, which is what's happening outside, is so much bigger than the orange box, which is what's happening inside. So that's the starting point, but let's start to go a bit deeper into this blue box and what this blue box is in practice. And from that point onward, I was not sure if I should present to you today a half full or a half empty glass perspective. And I hesitated a lot, and I decided to do both, to kind of show both the half full and the half empty. So if I start about the half empty, what's happening on the natural gas value chain? We can start by saying that there's a lot of emission. And here I'm showing some infrared video images of emission points which are on this value chain. You see a vent from a gas treatment, a storage tanks unit with a vent, and you see associated gas being directly released from the separator without even being flared. So these are some of the reality. And I could show you dozens of these videos. If we move forward, we know that there's actually quite a lot of emission points, including a lot of the large emission points. And here I'm showing a snapshot of the supra emitters as spotted by the MetaWatch service. So that's the glass, half empty perspective. But we can also look at the glass half full, what has been changing. And honestly, since over the last 10 years, a lot has been changing, and the situation has improved, if I can put it this way, or changed significantly. So one of the key change we can see is that a number of companies on this supply chain are implementing systematic LDAR. And systematic LDAR is a no-brainer, and we've seen that a number of companies are now doing it on a systematic basis. Great. We also have seen that a number of companies are joining international initiatives, and Manfredi in a minute will discuss more OGMP 2.0, so I won't discuss that further. But these companies are striving to get to best practice. And there's much more, the same. The same as the previous time. I cannot quote it all, and here you're seeing some measurements, both bottom up and top down, being done at the same time. If we're going to talk a lot about MRV moving forward and monitoring, reporting, verification, how can we have good data from methane? So let's look at the same, reporting of emission. And again, let's start with the glass half empty perspective, what's not there yet. So first, again, not a big spoiler here, a lot of countries are still reporting emissions, methane emission on a tier 1 basis, which is extremely uncertain. If we look at what the academic world has produced, most of the work has been focused on a few countries, as there's very little work which has been done, academic work which has been done in many of the exporting countries to the EU. And if you take here one example from Nigeria and look at the existing estimates, they're extremely variable, which reflects the level of uncertainty. If you see this huge difference between the different sources of information, that kind of illustrates the level of uncertainty we have now. So that's the glass half empty perspective. Again, let me flip for the other side and look at how things have been improving. So I think it's fair to say that a number of companies have systems in place to report their emission nowadays. I could obviously now spend time describing the methodology in Norway. And I decided just to put the link here and just invite you all to check, but obviously there's reporting process in Norway. Let me instead spend a bit of time on former Soviet Union countries, because that's well less known. Maybe because basically I could not put the link, all the methodology are all written in Russian. Russian is the best case, sometime in another Ukrainian or Kazakh. So here, emission are reporting for each facilities, and they're reporting by each facility to the regional division or daughter companies, and then they're aggregated. And the emissions are for every emission source category calculated separately. Use it typically engineering calculation using the physical characteristic of equipment. So of course, there's empirical coefficient like emission factor being used, which are by nature uncertain, but at the same time, so there's inherent uncertainty and all the normal challenge of any bottom-up inventory. Are there any emission source being missed or forgotten? Are the emission factor or the empirical coefficient accurate? But at the same time, there's a basis and there's detailed bottom-up inventory which exists in a number of these companies. Okay, sometimes I feel in our work and working in all these countries, sometimes we feel that the task may be daunting and we may lose hope, if I can put it this way. And at the same time, we know that a small proportion of the site are the largest source of emission. And here I'm taking a data set that EDF kindly shared with me, where we see that 3% of the site represents 71% of the emission, and that sites between 10 and 800 kilograms per hour. But fixing these blue bubbles, this 3% of the site would be already such a big game changer. And of course, then we can take care of the 97% of the site. And I'm absolutely not saying that we shouldn't fix all this small one, but the blue one should be the priority. Finishing, and I hope I'm within my 10 minutes. My key message for today is maybe that the natural gas value chain to Europe are deeply heterogeneous, and evolving very fast. There's a lot of sweeping statements on how things looks, but in practice, our experience is that there's a lot of variety and a lot of things are happening. So I think this is very important for me. And this is a great starting point. And this evolution can be used as an impetus to make real change. And I will agree with the previous speaker that real change needs to happen faster now. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for this this very understandable overview of what is often a complex problem. One thing I forgot to mention to all of you is that this time, since we have all these panelists with us, we will not take the questions right after each panelist's contributions. If you don't mind already using the Q&A box, and we will take all questions in the end, in the interest of time. And let me invite Manfredi to take the screen and share with us the MRV solutions we already have today.
Many thanks, Poppy, and thanks to the Environmental Defense Fund and the Florence School of Regulation, of course, for bringing us together today. I'm gonna talk today about the International Methane Emission Observatory and how we can help in contributing to the problem that Stephanie was highlighting earlier, that is the uncertainty of data. But let me start, if Chiara, we can move to the next slide, to the reason why the UN Environment Program that have the pleasure to represent today engages on methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. And you might have seen this graph. This is a graph taken from the 2019 emission gap report that UNEPS publishes every year, the next version of which is going to be presented next Wednesday, that tracks the pathway consistent with the policies that the country have committed to, including through their nationally determined contribution, and where the science tells us we will have to be to meet the 1.5 or 2 degree objective that as a society, our government representatives have taken the commitment of meeting 5 years ago in Paris. So if we can click one more time, Chiara, we will see that the task is indeed daunting, and we are in between 13 and 32 gigaton of CO2 emission equivalent from our target. And as an organization, you might have heard the Secretary General at Columbia University yesterday in his major speech on the state of the planet, As an organization, we are advocating and we're working with countries to reach the net zero emission by 2050. But we see methane as an extraordinary opportunity in the short term to buy us time as we take more systemic solution in place to move to a zero carbon economy. If we move to the next slide, we consider so up to 15% of the gap could be closed taking actions on methane emissions from a single sector, the oil and gas sector, in line with what the International Energy Agency says it is technically feasible, and in most cases at very low cost compared to other mitigation options. So with a number of partners and in the framework of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, UNEP has been working on this topic, focusing on three main categories: on transparency, the oil and gas methane partnership that has been mentioned earlier; science, we run together with the European Commission, the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, and Environmental Defense Fund, a number of methane science studies, and then on policy to promote the inclusion of aggressive methane reduction target in countries' long-term plan, NDCs, or other planning documents. If we move to the next slide, and this was really to highlight the point that Stephanie more eloquently than me made earlier, there is a lot of uncertainty about emission levels, and the more we measure, the more stakeholder measure, the more we know that inventories misrepresent. Let me not be judgmental, but at least misrepresent the status of methane emissions in the different jurisdictions. And so, together with the European Commission and as a spin-off of our current activities, UNEP has decided, Chiara, we can move to the next slide, to create an international methane emission observatory to really provide a nucleus for action that can accelerate methane emission around the world in a way that is extremely data-driven, and then we're going to talk about this in a second, but also that is very action-focused, because as we say, the size of the opportunity and the time frame by when we need to tackle this opportunity is very short. So to the next slide, Chiara, please. We're gonna the main functions. So the International Methane Emission Observatory will be receiving data from a variety of sources, but these are the main functions. On the one hand, it will be getting confidentially company data from the companies that are parts of the oil and gas methane partnership, that will be challenging and corroborating, verifying as a very specific meaning in my UNFCCC experience. So I like to use it with a little bit of with a grain of salt. But then it will be really working on updating core methodologies. Under the OGMP, we have defined five methodology or broad principles that companies have agreed to implement over time to increase the accuracy of their reporting. And we are not gonna mandate which methodologies they will have to use. We are just asking them to make them explicit so that we can compare them to the one that as OGMP we collectively recommend, and make sure that those are equivalent also in a way that allows for further sharing of these experiences. And then the observatory will be publishing company data on an aggregated level. It will be looking at the different sources to identify which are more interesting and have the more potential for reduction. And critically, as we still are the United Nations Environment Program, we'll be working with developing oil and gas producing countries for them to be better equipped to use the data and the information and the baselining work that the observatory will be doing to then enact methane mitigation policies and actions at national level. So we can move to the next slide. The core of the International Methane Emission Observatory will be really the integration of all these sources of data. And as mentioned, there will be the confidential company reports, the data from the methane science studies and similar activities, similar field studies that we intend performing in different parts of the world. National inventories that despite their inaccuracy represent a good wealth of data that we should improve and make available, and then indeed satellite data. And this is a space that is moving very fast. The Florence School of Regulation organized an entire webinar on it over the summer, and so I will won't enter too much into the details today. But just to say that there are more and more sources of data that we can use, and then we can connect and reconcile and integrate to generate a number of products that we hope and expect will be useful in promoting, again, better methane management around the world. I'm going to move to my next slide. I'm already late. I apologize. So this is some of the measurement campaigns that we have performed under the framework of the methane science studies. We've done measurements in Canada, on both sides of the border, in the Gulf of Mexico, in Australia. We're performing a global LNG study. We have done work on mid and downstream infrastructure in Europe, and we're exploring opportunities to do more measurements and more scientific campaigns in other regions. And we hope that through the International Methane Emission Observatory, we'll be able to scale up significantly our capacity to characterize and quantify methane emissions through this methodology. In the next slide, we're going to look a second at the data that the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership will be providing. Companies under the OGMP 2.0 framework have committed to report data, as I mentioned, at an increasing level of precision and disaggregation in 3 years for operated assets and in 5 years for non-operated assets. These already shows that there is a movement towards reporting emission not only for operated but also for non-operated assets. The Oil and Gas Methane Partnership expanded also to mid and downstream. It was only upstream, covering only upstream sources initially. We'll be covering all material sources of methane emissions, so all material sources of methane emission at least, and then we'll be tracking progress of companies towards their objectives. Can you, if we move to the next slide? So we have a significant increase in membership of the OGMP. We had 10 companies under the first version. We have 62 that participated as founding members in the launch that took place 10 days ago. I'm happy to report the first upstream US-based company has expressed its interest to enter the OGMP. So you will notice that most of these companies are based in Europe. But if we move to the next slide, they operate and are a working partnership with other companies well beyond the boundaries of Europe. And through the OGMP data, we'll be having data again at an increasing level of accuracy and granularity from all these different jurisdictions that we hope to be again able to then integrate with other sources. If we move to the next slide, we believe that the IMEO will be really a nucleus of actions that can be generated by then a number of different actors, as Christopher Jones was mentioning earlier, to have a common set of facts and data that stakeholders can build on to better manage methane emissions. So governments, certainly in both consuming and producing countries, companies to verify their emissions, to check that they're doing things right, and indeed from the industry point of view also to reassure the public that they are responsible actors that can be part of the solution to climate change, not only part of the problem. And then civil society that has had and continues to have an incredibly critical role in keeping all the other actors honest in this process. So I'm gonna be looking forward to the discussion, and thank you for listening at this presentation, and I look forward to seeing you later.
Thank you very much, Manfredi, for this very easy to follow presentation. I'm sure there will be lots of questions. I already see one. Let me invite now Mr. Stefano Grassi, Head of Cabinet of Commissioner Simpson, to share a few reflections with us. Stefano, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me, and good afternoon to everybody. And in particular, a word of thanks to the Florence School of Regulation for this seminar. I think what you're doing to promote the reflection on a stronger international action on methane emission reduction, I think is of great assistance for us, for the Commission, and of great importance for the global debate. I'm a bit ashamed to intervene for the first, because I was unfortunately joining in late in the discussion, because we are, in these days, we are part of the, we are involved in a very tough negotiations on the funding of energy infrastructure and energy projects under the recovery plan and other financial instruments under the MFF. So I was a bit late. But I wanted maybe to share one or two elements on our strategy and the follow-up that we're given to our strategy on how to reduce methane emission across the supply chain, because the international part of our strategy is a central component of what we want to do. And we have in our strategy identified 3 strands of work. The first is to work on the greater transparency along the supply chains, and relying also on the voluntary commitment and the voluntary work of industry on monitoring, reporting, and verification. And Manfredi just mentioned the OGMP 2.0, which is a central pillar of our strategy. My commissioner was there at the launch of this upgraded version of the OGMP. And we are very pleased with the larger number of companies, the success and the attractiveness of this initiative, and by the fact that the scope is going to be larger, and that every one of the participants is going to take individual commitments to reduce methane emissions. And this OGMP is for us also a basis on which the future International Observatory, the IMEO, will base its work, and we, as the European Union, we are one of the main funding and sponsors of this central agency for monitoring, collecting information and elements on methane emissions, reconciling them, and giving credible, robust science to the monitoring of methane emissions. And also, as part of this work and on transparency, we are committed to improve our detection and alert capacity, our satellite surveillance capacity through the Sentinel system, and make it available to international partners. I think in the coming years we will have more satellites, more capacity. Others, including, I think Poppy knows it well, you will have your own independent capacity of satellite surveillance. And I think this is very important to have a more stringent pressure in identification of the global major emitters, but also a more stringent pressure on the international community to address that. The second work stand for us is diplomatic action. It's very important that as a European Union, we try to build a consensus and create partnership and alliances with other importing countries, but also using all our bilateral and multilateral engagement. We are also working with producing countries, and most lately, one clear example, we had a very important ministerial meeting with Nigeria, and most of the conversation between my commissioner and the environment minister of Nigeria, who then was also part of OGMP 2.0 launch discussion, was about reducing methane emissions. And we are ready to partner those countries like Nigeria with technical assistance on the regulatory side and other forms of support. And we consider that it is important that we both importer and producer countries can work together on this issue. We would also like to use more in terms of our diplomatic outreach, the multilateral fora. I think it's important the work that UNEP is doing, but also important what we could do next year with a G20, and we will continue also to work with the World Bank. The first trend, and I'm ready to conclude, is our work on targets, incentives, and standards. You've seen what is in our strategy. We intend to work on that. It's an effective tool, most effective tool probably, to address and reduce methane emissions for fossil fuels will be exported and consumed on the European market. And the question we have in designing and thinking of those instruments is how you can make it really credible. How you verify the information, not only how you design an index and how much you can build on the methane supply index that we want the IMEO to develop, but also how then we verify the information, how transparent will be across the supply chains to avoid that there are perverse effects also of trade distortion. And there I am very interested to the discussion today, and the work also of the Florence School will help us enormously on that. Final consideration is when we wrote the strategy, we thought we will lead the way and lead an uphill battle. And I think now, if I see what certain companies are doing, and if I see the change in the US administration, and also the interest that they're already conveying to us for a future active role of the Environmental Protection Agency in developing methane updating their emission regulation was recently put in question. I think we see we can really build an alliance, a transatlantic alliance on methane emission reduction, which could make a difference. There are some US companies that are already indicating the interest to join the OGMP 2.0. I cannot give you the name, but I think it's very promising. And I think the work that the OGMP and our future work for the Observatory will be also important for the United States, because for them it's much better to build their own future upgraded regulatory framework on something that exists already, best practices, what the industry is already accepting, than starting from scratch. So I think there also the normative example of the EU and the importance of multilateral work will be very important. So next year will be a year of study and reflection on all those issues for us, because we want to come up with a proposal by the end of the year. And I stop here, but I think this initiative and the input that many of you are providing on these topics are very encouraging for us, and they will help us enormously in the future work. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Stefano, for this very helpful overview. If I may now invite Jutta Paulus from the Greens to share with us a little bit where the discussions are going in the Parliament. Jutta, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Actually, the discussions in the Parliament are starting, I would say, because we will now have an initiative report by the Parliament as response to the methane strategy, which the Commission has presented. I, of course, will be shadowing this report for the Greens. As far as I know, we do not have the name of the rapporteur yet. That has not been decided yet among the coordinators, but as said, I will be happy to shadow it. In my talks which I've had with other MEPs from not only the Green Group, of course, but also from other political groups, we do have to make sure that people are aware of the importance of the issue, because right now I often receive very puzzled looks when I'm talking about the upstream emissions of the use of fossil gas, because most people are like, well, but it does emit less CO2 than coal, and so this is just great. And it's a sort of, well, education exercise, actually. Say, just telling them, please look at the numbers, look at the satellite data which we have, where we already know that we have a large amount of emissions upstream. And also I'm always pointing out to the study which has been done on isotopes, showing that we are underestimating the methane emissions from oil and gas. And I think as soon as we manage to have our climate people alerted to that, but because there are quite a few people working on climate, but hardly anyone besides Nicholas and me working on methane, but we have to make sure that we have a larger group of people really paying attention to this and making sure that we, for example, apply the do no significant harm principle properly when it comes to funds being distributed now after Corona in order to bring up our economy again. In the Recovery and Resilience Fund, there is a lot of outspoken voices saying we want to finance fossil gas on that. And if we don't pay attention, we might even end up with not curbing emissions by these funds by any means. When it comes to LDAR and detection of leaks and closing leaks, I think Parliament would be happy to have a legislative proposal from Commission there. I don't see a lot of problems, actually, because it's basically cleaning up behind you or while you're doing things. So no one could really say, well, that's being unfair to European companies. It's much more difficult when it comes to the upstream emissions, which has been already laid out nicely by the previous speakers. And there, I think we should make it clear that Europe will, of course, be a partner in the global partnership, but Europe will not exclude by this partnership doing measures on its own if there is no sufficient progress. And what I'm also trying to do, I'm coming just before the webinar started, about 5 minutes ago, I entered my flat. I had a conversation with a stakeholder from the chemical industry, and they are trying to become carbon neutral by 2040, which I think is great. And they're really doing a good job and being very responsible, looking at their pre-chain and at their suppliers and all that. And I said, well, have you ever thought of talking to the operator of the chemistry park where your plant is sitting in, because he wants to replace a coal plant by a gas plant? Fine with that, okay. Have you talked to him about methane emissions? And they didn't know about this issue at all. And so I said, well, I gave them a few links and said, please come back to me if there are any questions, and please put pressure on your partner. Put pressure on him that he puts pressure on his gas supplier to look after this issue. Because I think we will not be fast enough by legislation alone. Because if we come up with legislation and regulation, the natural reflex, so to speak, from industry is always, leave us alone, we don't want this. But if your customer comes up to you and says, I care for this, it's important for me, then we have an additional levy, so to speak, in order to push things in the right direction. I'd keep it at that at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your always very informed contribution, Jutta. Nicolas, if I may invite you to share a few reflections, including from your conversations as a shadow rapporteur on system integration. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Poppy, and the Environmental Defense Fund, and also to the Florence School of Regulation for such important debates around methane emissions that, as Jutta said before, is not a big issue in the parliament. Not a lot of MEPs are interested on that, but I think that we have to put pressure in, because methane emissions are also very important in the climate issue. And if we want to be climate neutral, we are thinking only about our own emissions in the EU, but we have to think in all the emissions we are producing in our economy, because the gas sector are producing the methane emissions not in the EU, it's outside the EU. So we have to manage that, and we have to tackle that also with a geopolitical perspective. It's not only our regulation, is how to build a strong regulation in Europe that allow us to deal in a global war, because it's not only Europe the methane emission. I think that as the Commission highlights in the methane strategy, we are the world's largest importer in fossil fuels, and we have the responsibility to strengthen and to promote the reduction of all the associated emissions with the fuels that we are imported. This is very important to keep in mind for us as regulators. We have the duty to do that. But of course, we have to deal with a lot of things here. First is we need data. Yes, I think that an observatory is crucial. Manfredi talked about this observatory. I guess, and I hope it will be located in Madrid, in Spain. We are fighting for that. But of course, we need better data, and we need better approach to the data. I know that the measurement methods, sometimes we have some critical measure methods, but combining ground level and top level, aerial level, space level with satellites, I think that we can make a good improvement on the measures of the methane emissions. But of course, we have a problem with the imported gas. I don't know, I think that all of you know, but we will have a EU legislative proposal as Stefano perfectly knows, because he is one of the responsible on launching that, the intention to have a legislative proposals on that next year. But of course, we have to deal a new legislation on eliminating routine baiting and flaring in the energy sector. Last month, in November, I asked the Commission for some recent movements that we have in Europe. I think that all of you noticed that, for example, ENGIE walked away from a proposed 7 billion contract in 20 years, and a 20 years deal to import natural gas from Texas, liquefy for LNG from Texas. And one of the reasons that ENGIE put on the table was the environmental problem. Okay, the methane leak emissions from this imported gas. And I think that this is an important decision, but I think that this kind of decision must be managed in the whole EU perspective. So, for example, I asked to the Commission if they have noticed of some broken deals like that in the EU, because I think that it's very important to eliminate the important methane emissions from outside the EU. But I think that we have to deal with that commonly, because we are under the Paris Agreement. We have climate commitments as the EU, and I think that we have to manage carefully this kind of decisions in the EU. And of course, I think that methane emissions sometimes are very easy to avoid. We have how to do that at zero cost. I think that the International Energy Agency said that almost 40% of the methane emissions are avoidable at net zero cost. So we have to put a level playing field in our rules and regulations in the EU to do that as fast as possible we can, okay? Because I think also that this is a very important point. And related to the climate policy, next year we have a COP in Glasgow. We have to deal with Article 6. We are talking about the carbon border adjustment in the EU for imported carbon, also from the energy sector. So I think that we have to manage carefully that. I think that we have to solve this Article 6. We have to think in new ETS systems in the world. We have to try to link some ETS systems in the world. And of course, I hope that, for example, the new government of the United States put more attention on this issue, because they are one of the biggest exporters of the methane to the EU. So if we work commonly, we work together, I think that we can do great things and avoid this kind of broken deals that I think that we need also this supply in Europe. So if we need supply, but a clean supply. And of course, deal with other countries as Russia or Algeria that we are talking before. But this is my first ideas. Later we can talk also about for example, how to manage, how to make an approach to the cargo carriers without emissions, and how some companies are dealing with their offsets to do that. Because I think that some companies are trying to put on the table that some offsets are not a real environmental offsets. I think these offsets are business as usual offsets that they have to do. For example, abandoned wells of oil and gas. For example, in the United States, they have 2 million of abandoned wells of oil in the United States, for example. But let's continue the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, for your reflections and for pushing the borders, the boundaries of what we can consider in terms of instruments. Let me very quickly invite Stefan Rolle to give us a view from the Council. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Poppy, for inviting me to this webinar, and thank you very much, Christopher, for giving the floor from Florence School of Regulation. I mean, I can give you an opinion of Germany, not of the Council, and of course, on the other hand, I must say, having heard to everything which I can completely share, or almost completely share what has been said, I must say, and I wished Germany could still be in the President and Council's presidency in the second half of 2021, because I would really like to, yes, to accompany this process from the president's seat. But okay, this will change, and nevertheless, I can only tell you that, and I think this was very important, what was said by Manfredi, that a global problem needs a global solution. This is so true. On the other hand, we in Germany take the issue of methane emissions very seriously, and I'm glad that there is an ongoing public debate in Germany on this issue. However, I mean, on the other side, the issue has been very ambiguous so far with regard to the research which has been done, and we still lack a lot of data, and we think that we still have to do a lot of work with regard to data collection. And with regard to this, we support very much in the respective studies and commissioned by the European Commission, and look forward to the results as well. And yes, and as I said, we would like to wish to be still in the presidency next year. But with regard to the methane strategy integrated and published by the European Commission, we are very supportive of that. And of course, we also welcome the holistic approach of the strategy, because I think we go not far enough if we focus simply on the energy sector with regard to methane emissions, because waste and especially agriculture, we have to take also this into consideration. This is important, I think. But as I said, I mean, what is in the strategy of the Commission is accurate measurement and effective mitigation measures, and we welcome them. And we are looking forward to what will be done, as Stefano said, in the next year, with regard, especially with regard to effective measures. We do not want to leave the Commission and others alone, and also not, for example, the UNIP and the Observatory, which is a really great idea, which we can only welcome. And on our side, we have also commissioned a meta study on that issue, which is on methane emissions along the value chain of natural gas. And in addition, we will also be supportive for a future study, which is going with regard, which will start and collect data on the upstream chain of natural gas in Russia. And as you all know, Germany is one of the major consumers of Russian gas. And so we think this is very important, not only for Germany, but for Europe as a whole, and perhaps even beyond, because Russia is also exporting to other parts of the world. But I think this will do for the moment. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion later on.
Thank you very, very much, Stefan, and particular thanks for actually acting immediately on the issue with more knowledge. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Jonathan Stern, who has been thinking about this issue for at least about 2 years. And Jonathan, very much looking forward to hear all these ideas you have in your paper.
Thank you very much, Poppy, and thank you for the invitation to address this very useful webinar. Let me be brief. As you say, I've been working on methane for a little while, but I've been working on natural gas issues for about 40 years. And the data issues with methane are quite unbelievably difficult. I speak as someone who, as I say, has been working with problematic data for many decades, but this is really in another dimension to how problematic the data are. I'd like to just speak briefly about the methane strategy and what I think is really good about it, but a few problems that I see with it. First of all, as one or two people have pointed out, it is pretty much focused on oil and gas, which is fine, but there is a very serious problem with coal. The data for coal are even worse than for oil and gas, and in many respects, they just don't exist at all. And this is problematic because of not just operating mines, but mines which ceased operating some time ago. So let me focus on the two initiatives that were mentioned earlier. The diplomatic initiative to form a coalition of importing countries, particularly in Asia, and a diplomatic outreach campaign for fossil fuel producing and exporting countries. And it was really good to hear that the Commission has already started work with a country like Nigeria on how that could happen. Now that is, if you like, what Christopher Jones referred to as the carrot. The stick is the threat of compulsion and imposing a default value for volumes that don't have accurate MRV, and the Commission considering proposing legislation on targets, standards, and other incentives. So I think, from my experience, the diplomatic route is the route to go if you want to achieve something quickly. If you end up going the route of compulsion, then you enter into a very difficult world where there will be pushback along the lines of WTO discrimination. There will be pushback in terms of mutual accusations of, let's look at what you're doing in the EU. Oh dear, you don't seem to be doing that well. And this is all very unproductive. And I speak as someone who was the EU speaker of the EU Russia Gas Advisory Council for 5 years, and we spent a lot of unproductive time before we started to realize what the productive way moving forward is. So I totally applaud the efforts of Manfredi and his colleagues on the Observatory, but I think this is a slightly different initiative to what the EU will need to do in relation to imports of particularly natural gas, but also possibly oil. So the idea of creating a methane supply index based on national emissions, I think, is excellent for the Observatory. How this will work quite with the UNFCCC is not entirely clear to me, but I still think it's an extremely worthwhile effort, and I wish it all speed. However, when we talk about trying to estimate emissions from imports, I think we will work better with exporting countries if we focus on export supply chains. This is very different from national emissions. So we need to focus the attention on, from the production to the border of the EU, what are the emissions from that supply chain? I think then we are on much safer ground than trying to establish a kind of national emissions base and then saying, okay, we take that emissions base as your national emissions and we count that at the EU border. Now, this is difficult because for individual countries like Russia, like the US, for example, there may be very different supply chains from different fields through different pipelines to different liquefaction plants. Some of those supply chains will be easier to establish, some of them will be harder, but they will be, as I say, very different. The good news is that there are only 6 countries that really are important if we take 2019 data, for example, and those countries are Russia, Algeria, Nigeria, Qatar, Norway, and the US. Now, if we exclude Norway, because you can tell from both IEA data, and we have an excellent paper by my colleague Marshall Hall on our site, which goes into great detail, Norway has a standard that is definitely going to be met with anything that the EU will impose. So we only really need to focus on 5 countries, or if you like, 5 governments or 5 national companies. But we need to be clear that this is going to be difficult. And if we enter into this in an antagonistic way and not a diplomatic way, I think we're going to have a great deal of problems. Myself, I think there's some difficulty establishing baselines, particularly in countries for which satellite data isn't available, and I don't think is going to be available in any detail anytime soon. But I think we can overcome that if we take an approach which says, fine, show us your data. We will give you technical assistance. In some respects, we'll probably need to give financial assistance as well. But I think that, again, is manageable. So let me close there and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for the very crisp and challenging questions you've raised. Let me invite Mark Brownstein to share his views from a US side. What do you think is feasible, Mark?
Well, so first of all, thank you to everyone who's participated in this webinar, and in particular to all of the representatives and government officials who've taken time out of their busy schedules to participate in this, and for the seriousness and purpose with which you all are approaching this. It's much appreciated. And, you know, to be blunt about it, the United States has some work to do to restore confidence in our commitment to addressing issues of climate change, and frankly, to restore relationships and renew and nurture relationships that have frayed over the last several years. When we talk to the incoming administration about the best ways to go about this, we talk about the methane issue as being the first and most impactful way to make progress in addressing warming. Methane, as I think we all know, is driving at least 25% of the warming our planet is experiencing right now. And the oil and gas industry and the coal industry, to Jonathan's point, is responsible for much of that. And we know from all of the work that has been done over the last several years, reports that the IEA have issued and so on, that this is a fixable problem. There are the technologies available to industry today to get at least a 75% reduction with technologies that are available commercially today. So this is why we say it is an impactful problem. It is a problem with an immediate solution. And it's one where the United States, as the world's largest producer of oil and gas, has a particular responsibility to take action and lead on. I think the good news is that all indications is that the incoming administration understands this. And we would expect to see in relatively short order a renewed commitment to domestic regulation of oil and gas operations in the United States. And that means regulation both in terms of emissions of methane on production on federal lands, and also regulations that would apply to all oil and gas operations, whether on federal or private lands, performed through the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. There are already on the books regulations dealing with new sources of oil and gas, and the prior administration was trying to unwind those. So of course, step one will be to restore the regulations that had been in place. And step two is basically to promulgate a set of regulations to deal with existing sources of oil and gas operations in the US, over 1 million wells. And we would expect that the Biden administration will move quickly to do that, sort of in the first 100 days of the administration to launch that process. And we expect that it would take about a year to get that done. So maybe in a year's time, 18 months, we would expect to see domestic regulation in the United States. But so that's on the domestic front. On the international front, of course, we fully expect the United States to rejoin the Paris Agreement. And along with that, we would look for the United States to reassert or try to reestablish its leadership with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and the United Nations Environment Program. And in particular, we would look for the United States to be taking a leadership role in some of the initiatives that have been talked about here today, particularly the International Methane Emission Observatory. And and we and other NGO colleagues in the United States will be pushing hard on the new administration to make that happen. But additionally, and we would hope that the United States would join with the European Commission, the European Union, and others to make sure that methane emissions are on the agenda for the Conference of the Parties to be held in Glasgow in November. We think that COP26 is the absolute right time for those countries that are committed to addressing methane emissions to bring this issue forward and find ways to make this a global priority. And we would hope as well that not only the United States would be working to make that happen, but the Commission, European Union would be working to make that happen, other countries like China as well. Additionally, the United States has a set of bilateral relationships that we think can be very important here. In 2016, the US issued a commitment along with Canada and Mexico to achieve a 40 to 45% reduction in oil and gas methane emissions by 2025. Both Canada and Mexico proceeded to implement regulations to do that. As I said, we're looking for the United States now to meet that commitment as well. But it's an example of the kind of bilateral or multilateral work that can be done in parallel with UNFCCC processes. And there was mention on this seminar today about the possibility of the United States and the European Union working directly together on a bilateral relationship on this issue. And that is certainly something that we would work to encourage and support. Last thing I'll say is that I would also expect the United States to take some new role on financial reporting. Transparency here is key. Many financial institutions that we talk with are interested in having a better understanding of methane emissions from the companies that they invest in. And we would like to see the Securities and Exchange Commission take a leadership role here in setting up some reporting standards, which would facilitate the financial community being able to do a better job of understanding, emissions, their significance to the bottom line of various companies, and be able to assess liabilities, climate liabilities, based on that data. So let me stop there, Poppy.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you for bringing in I think anytime anyone brings the Securities and Exchange Commission, things get real. Let me invite, we have the great honor to have Mr. Sakamoto to share a little bit with us how Japan, a major natural gas and hydrogen importer, is viewing the issue. Mr. Sakamoto, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Poppy. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Thank you for inviting me to this important event. And also thank you for your kind introduction at the beginning. And I also thank Andres for mentioning my local time. It's around midnight, Friday night. But it's still my great pleasure to participate in this important event because of the enormous significance and importance of this particular issue. Unlike other panelists, I have prepared a few slides to go through. So let me share my screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
This is my first slide. My name is Toshi Sakamoto from Institute of Energy Economics, Japan. But before joining this institute, I was a climate change negotiator and dealing with energy efficiency at the Japanese government, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. Let me start with some background and some key figures in Japan. The first figure is the methane emissions in Japan's GHG national inventory, it amounts to just 2.3%, and about 75% of Japan's methane emissions are coming from agriculture. And the total methane emissions decreased by 33% between 1990 and 2018. 23 is much, much smaller than global figure 16% as indicated in AR5 of IPCC. So domestically, within Japan, we are paying a much, much less attention to methane emissions compared with energy CO2 emissions. But at the same time, Japan, we are fully aware of a huge responsibility as a major LNG consumers. We are consuming about 20% of globally traded LNGs. And globally, moreover, methane emission reduction will be even more important as blue hydrogen or blue ammonia picks up. Both IEA, Energy Technology Perspective 2020, and our institute, IEEJ's Outlook, projects that the blue hydrogen will play a major role as low carbon hydrogen for the foreseeable future. And also my institute projects that the LNG global consumption will increase by 27% by 2050 under circular carbon economy scenario, which is to decarbonize the fossil fuel use. So this issue is very important. We fully recognize that. Let me show you some initial responses from Japanese stakeholders. We sounded out OGMP 2.0 version to Japanese stakeholders, and we found that a very, very low awareness of this initiative, OGMP 2.0. But this is no wonder since they haven't been directly involved in the discussions thus far. And there, the Japanese stakeholders' general concerns include the possible impact on investment and financing due to additional cost of detection and or measurement, and influence on LNG trade from business perspectives. And Jonathan mentioned the WTO, and I agree with that. If a national government takes a strong measure, it could raise the issue of WTO compatibilities, i.e. National treatment. Japanese stakeholders just want to know more about this initiative. This is simply because of more and more intertwined international energy market. The same LNG sources will be shared with European consumers, and more sales with European counterparts are expected. And also, as Manfredi showed us, 62 companies, member companies of OGMP, are doing their businesses all over the world as an operator. And I think the same joint venture, Japanese companies are also participating as non-operators. So in that case, there would be direct impact on Japanese stakeholders. And also domestically, we of course meet to downstream elements such as regasification, transmission, storage, and distribution. European EU commissioned methane strategy mentioned coordinated international action among buyer countries, quote unquote. This has to be left to the government-to-government discussions. But besides that, I believe that Japan could contribute through its technologies and experiences. We have good experiences of LNG upstream project engineering and midterm downstream pipeline and LNG regasification terminal management, and more importantly, detection technologies. Just recently, Tokyo Gas Tokyo Gas Company's subsidiary developed a very unique equipment that is a portable detection using laser technologies. These portable detectors are being used in more than in almost 30 countries all over the world. And good practices include INPEX operations, for example. This is an excerpt from INPEX website. The latest big project, ICSIS. This is the project in Australia, which started the production July 2018. They introduced state-of-the-art technology as indicated the 4 bullet points here. And also they started collect and report statistics on methane fugitives. They publish methane emissions from flaring as well as venting for both domestic and international. Let me finish with my personal suggestion for the way forward. I do believe more dialogue between European and Japanese stakeholders is needed. And for this purpose, perhaps subject to METI's consent, we could consider using the existing opportunities, such as Japan-EU LNG consultation. The last meeting was held in July last year. It hasn't been held since then. This is a consultation framework between METI and the European Commission, as I understand, and my institution is a contractor to prepare this meeting. And also there is another good opportunity, which is the LNG producer-consumer conference. This is annual conference since 2012, co-hosted by METI, Japan, and Qatar. 27 ministers and more than 60 CEOs participated in this year's event. So these two opportunities could be a good framework to further discuss this initiative. And in addition, working level discussion, nitty-gritty discussion may be also needed. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Toshiyuki, for this very hopeful presentation. It's very encouraging to hear the attention on the issue that Japan has. Let me very quickly pass the floor to George Taibos from MIQ to speak about certification. And aware of time, we will try to get the main questions in the end, but let me not eat up more of this time. George.
Thank you very much, Poppy. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, good afternoon for the ones in Europe, and obviously good evening by now for Toshi, and good morning, I guess, for people in the United States. My name is George Taibos. I'm a senior advisor at MIQ, and you will see it on the screen here. So many of you will be wondering what MIQ is about. It's a newly launched not-for-profit partnership between the Rocky Mountains Institute and Systemic. And today I've actually enjoyed listening to the other panelists, and I find it reassuring that we all agree we can no longer just ignore the methane emissions, which wasn't necessarily the case several years ago. What I've also interested to listen to today was the many challenges around solving this. And we hope that with what we are trying to do here with MIQ, we can answer several of these questions. I think my fellow panelists will also all agree that ambitious and intelligent regulation will be a key ingredient in solving the methane problem. For example, we welcome the European Commission's methane strategy. We actually thank the EU for showing a global leadership in this vital area. Now, aside from regulation, oil and gas operators are also taking positive steps. I think Stephanie mentioned a couple there with the glass half full and the glass half empty approach, through the adoption of voluntary measures and also memberships of industry coalitions such as OGMP, OGCI and MGP. However, unfortunately, there are limitations inherent both to the regulatory and voluntary approaches. Regulation takes time and is bound by jurisdictions, which, as we all know, poses a problem, for example, for the EU as a net importer of natural gas, and several of these aspects have been mentioned today. Voluntary measures, on the other hand, are not always transparent, And then there is the issue of accountability when the industry is seen to be making its own marking its own homework. And it's for these reasons that the Rocky Mountain Institute and Systemic, we've come together to create MIQ. So MIQ is an independent certification system that will provide a level playing field. MIQ can be implemented and acted on whilst the regulation is being prepared. And MIQ will provide the transparency and the accountability that is going to be needed. And again, there's several questions that I've seen around auditing, transparency, that we hope to address with that. MIQ certification will enable the creation of differentiated gas market through an A to F grading system. This will demonstrate that not all gas is equal when it comes to climate impacts. Other examples of certification, such as guarantees of origin or the IREX scheme, show this differentiation will create financial incentives for producers to invest in methane abatement technology, and that should be our ultimate goal here. We've all seen the growing demand for verifiable cleaner gas, with the recent example being, for example, Engie in France and Singapore Pavilion being the most prominent. The certification scheme we have designed will provide companies such as Engie with the information they need for the provenance of their LNG. We believe MIQ certification provides a third way for methane abatement, which is compatible with both regulatory and voluntary approaches. It's the world's first market-based system for reducing methane emissions that is independent and third-party audited and can be applied today around the world. The MIQ standard, against which the certification will be assessed, is measured on facility level as well, across 3 criteria: methane intensity, technology deployment, and company practices. We acknowledge fully that emissions factors alone are an imperfect solution for assessing methane intensity, but in the near term, it is the most practical way forward, and the other 2 criteria ensure there is a fuller picture of methane emissions at each facility. Alongside and on top of this 3-pronged approach, we have developed an accreditation standard that the auditors of the MIQ certification must meet. This part of the standard highlights the need for the auditors to have a proven track record in the upstream production and have in-depth methane emissions expertise. This will also ensure transparency and enable the MIQ certification to be used around the world. Furthermore, we have designed the standards to be dynamic, so that as new technology for more accurate measurement arrives, for example, EDF satellite systems come into use, it can evolve to incorporate these improved methods of measurements. And it's, in that sense, it's a similar approach as what OGMP is also doing. We're also in the process of extending the standard so that emissions can be assessed across the entire LNG process, including liquefaction, transport, and regasification. We've had very positive feedback on the MIQ standard from environmentalists, regulators, buyers, producers, and also traders. Work is rapidly progressing towards our first pilot in Q1 of next year. We've recently signed an MOU with GCC, which is Green Certificate Company, the team behind the IREX standards. GCC will act as our issuing and registry body for MIQ and work with us to finalize the standard. We also absolutely see MIQ as aligned, for example, with EU regulatory framework. We believe that once there's a proof of concept that the MIQ certification works, the EU or any other regulators could eventually take over the running of these schemes if they wish so, as many have done in the IREX example in the electricity markets. And finally, our aim is for the world to be powered 100% by clean energy, but we recognize there is a way to go. Natural gas will play a role in that energy transition. Our mission is to reduce the climate impacts of the methane emissions from oil and gas until we get there. Thank you for your time, and I'm aware we're almost over the time, so Poppy is probably going to interrupt me soon anyway. Anyway, if you'd like to be kept up to date, please do visit our website and look forward to many more questions, including from the panelists. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Tybos. And I really do apologize for not interrupting people, but I think we really had important knowledge points that we didn't have before. And so if you allow me to summarize questions in 2 categories and perhaps raise one question to Stefano Grassi. Stefano, many of our participants are curious to know where is the EU in terms of conversations with Russia? What's the status of the dialogue on this particular issue? Stefan, I think you're muted.
Well, Russia is for us a very important interlocutor, not only supplier. We have always had and we continue to have technical contacts with them, but as you can imagine, our dialogue with Russia is in particular subject to a broader context, and the current also stalemate on the situation in Eastern Ukraine and Crimea, and therefore we have very limited contacts. Out of the different countries that were mentioned, of the big five of whom we should speak, we are. Forgot to mention that, for instance, in addition to Nigeria, we also had very recently a contact with Qatar, where we raised the methane issue, and we push them and we encourage them to be part of OGMP. We have a dialogue with Nigeria, and of course we have very constant contacts with Norway. So we are covering most of them. I saw that some asked when we will come up with our regulatory proposal. I think will be for the fourth quarter of 2021, around the end of the year. And some were asking about the consultation of stakeholders and third parties. That proposal will be prepared with a very intensive consultation of all stakeholders internally and third countries interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one last question to both Stefan and Manfredi. There are many of our participants who are curious to know how will verification work, considering especially the European context that is very much aligned with the UNFCCC system. How do you see the collaboration between IMEO and the national government, the national authorities responsible for for ensuring compliance on MRV? Manfredi, if you can unmute, please.
Hello? Yeah, you can hear me now. Okay, fantastic. So I can start, and obviously I'm curious to hear the opinion of Stefan as well. From our point of view, there is no competition at all. I mean, the International Emission Observatory will be working with government. We are owned by governments as the United Nations Environment Program, so we certainly are not in competition with those. And the idea is absolutely to inform the national inventories, to inform national authorities and collaborate with them actually in performing studies in their jurisdictions and outside, and for the data that will be collected and published and in a transparent fashion as we typically do, to then for those data to fit into the data that will be forming the national inventory. So from that point of view, we see no competition at all, but actually quite good level of complementarity. On the verification piece, I mean, this is part of the work that we will have to do in the next few months. But the idea is really, again, I said earlier, I provided a caveat on the word verification, but the idea is really to be able to use the confidential data that the companies will be providing at site level, at asset level, and to compare them with field measurements, with satellite data, and also to compare them across the fleet of similar installations in similar jurisdiction or others. So it's in an initial phase, we imagine that we are going to be able to associate an uncertainty bar to the reporting of the companies in terms of their methane emissions, and with time and as technology evolve and both top-down and bottom-up technology, as Matt Gonzalez mentioned, we're going to be able to increase the accuracy, and we're going to increase the ability of providing confidence that what the companies are reporting is credible or not, as a matter of fact. And just to respond to one point that George raised, under the OGMP, the companies certainly do not mark their own work. It is very clear that the United Nations Environment Programme retains the liberty of judging the data that the companies will be providing, and while we're going to give them the possibility to see what we're going to tell about them, we are going to retain the liberty again of saying what our analysis and judgment indicate on the level of confidence that we have on their data. Thank you.
Stefan, do you have any reflections?
Do you mean me?
Yes.
Okay, I was not sure because we have Stefanie, we have Stefano, and me. Okay, yes, I think I can be very short on this topic because I mean, we have also collected some reflections in the council in the last days, and we saw that there's also some ongoing data collecting in some member states, but not in all. And on the other hand, there will be probably also some data collecting on EU level, and this has to be combined, and this may not or should not be contradictory. And so I think we have a strong feeling that these should be centralized on European level in order also to harmonize the basis of data collection. And so with regard to international governments, I mean, yes, it has been said by Manfredi, it has to be a step-by-step approach. First, in having an EU harmonized approach, and then going on the international level, which in my view could be harmonized and going out from a unit. But I will leave these question open to those who have to discuss it with the decisive bodies, and especially within the European Commission. And the question will be easier for the major countries like the US or Japan, who can contribute to it directly. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Stefan. We have enough questions to be here for another half hour, but it is already way too late for Toshiyuki. Christopher, may I invite you to summarize this really rich discussion in only a few minutes, and just to thank you all from my side, and to say that we will take all your questions and try to answer them in writing after the event. Thank you all.
Thank you, Poppy, and thank you to the panelists for a quite remarkable discussion. Unsurprisingly, I think there was a great agreement, clearly, on the need for measurement and transparency. The Observatory and the Methane Supply Index, wholehearted support, which is great. And I say unsurprisingly because then it starts getting more tricky, as I think people have shown. I think the issues that Jonathan Stern and also Stefano Grassi mentioned, the diplomatic effort in terms of getting our gas suppliers to sign up for this transparency and to observe the very high standards that are required by Tier 3 reporting is terribly important, but it's not going to be a walk in the park. And what Jonathan said about, well, there's only probably 5 main suppliers that you really need to focus on, is cause for optimism. There's something that Jonathan Stern mentioned that I hadn't thought about before. And so the diplomatic effort that Stefano Grassi mentioned, and the outreach to countries to help them and encourage them, I think is extremely encouraging. But then when we start talking about the stick, everybody's in agreement with the carrot, the stick then gets more difficult. And what Jonathan mentioned that I hadn't thought of until now is that the default approach that the Commission has in its communication is actually quite tricky, because if you impose default values on gas producers in order to push them into the Observatory, stroke OGMP, etc., and that just ends up in the WTO and conflict, you may actually not get where you need to be. So that I thought that was interesting and difficult. The other part of the stick, if you like, which is, okay, once you've identified very precisely what are the FME levels of your different suppliers, what are you going to do with it? How are you then going to ensure that that is internalized into natural gas pricing in the European Union? We haven't touched on it at all. Nobody mentioned it. The elephant in the room, everybody just didn't look at it. Because that at the end of the day is why we're doing this, isn't it? It's to ensure that the real costs of the GHG related to natural gas are actually internalized in the prices that people pay for their natural gas. So we've all managed to ignore one of the big elephants. The point that Jonathan also mentioned about coal, I thought was extremely important. And also what Manfredi mentioned, which I also hadn't thought of before, is that actually this policy is a huge opportunity. Because there are so many easy wins, and how those easy wins in terms of reducing FME very quickly to a very significant extent, because of the high greenhouse gas value of methane, this could have a very significant and very important greenhouse gas effect by getting rid of it very quickly. And of course, when the quicker you get rid of greenhouse gases, the dividend that you get from that. I thought it was very encouraging, our colleagues from the United States and Japan, and that all of a sudden we have an opportunity in front of us to have a real EU-US approach on this. And that would be a huge driver of change and could really be a game changer here. Our two members of the European Parliament, thank you very much indeed for your comments. I think we are all struck by the determination of the Parliament to do this, and the very, very impressive level of knowledge and determination to do this in the Parliament, which is very reassuring and encouraging for the future. Regarding Stefano Grassi's mention for the legislation next year, I think what this debate, if anything, does, if this debate does anything, it shows the importance of getting that right. Because the right answer in terms of FME, it's not a black and white binary calculation. It's about physics, economics, and the practical ability to do things, and politics. So this will be a very difficult balancing exercise. So we're not at the end of this debate, and certainly the FSR will continue to try and support the continued work here. I just got to pass to Andries Piebals, Poppy, if I may, just for 1 second.
Yeah, well, from my side, I would like to thank Poppy, because it was really a pleasure working with you, Poppy, and with EDF, because definitely our outreach increases immensely as a Florence School of Regulation. So this was really a privilege to prepare the 2 webinars with you and with VDF. That was really, really much appreciated. And I would mention also 2 other persons that are important in preparing this. Chiara, that was responsible for all this webinar, and my colleague Maria Olchak, who is doing fantastic job. And without her, well, I would be lost, and FSR would be lost. So I'm very glad that she took care about the event. Thank you very much, and I go pass back to Poppy.
Thank you all very much for this excellent conversation, and I really wish we had an extra half hour to go through these extremely interesting questions, and I promised Jonathan to give him the challenging and hardest questions. You are not getting away with this, Jonathan. I think we will follow up with Andreas Graf questions.
Not a problem, not a problem.
So I wish you all a wonderful weekend, and thank you very, very much for staying with us much later than we were initially planned. Thank you.